Hello, this is Mike, Christina, and Fabian talking about workspaces, workspace, singular, and organization and terms. So let me quickly share my screen because I want to get it right. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
That is good. Okay, let me quickly recap what I think, and then, or what I've also found with the folks from fulfillment. Let's do this here. So my understanding after talking to you for the last time was that I think what we need as an organization and what you need as a workspace is maybe 90% the same thing. There are, I think, implementation questions, because I think there are multiple ways of sort of arriving at that point. I'm not really super deep into that at the moment, so I apologize if that is making things harder. But I think my proposal is the following, and I think it's down here. So Mike, you asked me, is this the entity? I think this is the organization entity that I'm proposing. The same object the workspace team is working on, or a separate entity. I think it can be the same. That's sort of my first thing, because we are looking at this from an infrastructure perspective, where I think our main requirement is that we hope to be able to group things together and keep them on a pod. That's kind of the main thing. I think from a workspace perspective, if I understood both of you correctly, you need to decide where to put settings, right? If they should be at the group level or at the workspace level, and if instance level settings should move. So that's a big thing. And for fulfillment, they want to be able to bill people sort of one layer above a top level group. They want to be able to say, like, you have multiple top level groups, we bill you for one. And so having one entity, whatever it's called, that allows them to link it to a billing account is useful to them. Kind of the gist, I think. I'll pause here.
Yeah, I will say that I view Workspace as the group.
Do you like your quiche?
1 second, please. I'm in a meeting. No, sorry.
Group Workspace, right? The GitLab group entity. Christina and I and the associated engineers as tasked with organizing how the organizations are organized. If that's a lot of organizations in there. But so yeah, billing, settings, that stuff are components of that, but also generally the structure of how things are presented to the user, the tools that organizations need to organize themselves, essentially. Groups, projects, user management, settings, it's all of these things. So
it's all of these things, and that's what you want to put into a workspace. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
is that your view as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I think I'm essentially calling that an organization, and I'm putting it above multiple groups, as you can see down here, right? So you could have an organization with multiple groups and then subgroups and projects. And I picked up on that last time, Mike. Maybe you can correct me again if I was wrong. You said something that I thought was quite interesting, where what makes a top level group special? And I think all of those things that you just spoke of are the special things that make that group kind of different to all the other groups.
Yeah.
And so I think you can think of it as in two ways. You can say, like, well, we're going to take this top level group and we're going to turn it into a workspace, or we're going to take this specific part, move it into a separate entity, sort of one level above, and call that something else. And I think I'm sort of in the approach two, even though I'm not sure if that really ultimately matters as much, because the outcome is probably the same, that you have something above for users where they can manage all of those things,
Mhm.
and then other things below that, right?
Yeah.
So
And I would qualify that as more of a migration
yes,
implementation than whether it changes the actual outcome of the structure. If someone is starting new in GitLab post Workspace's launch, I don't think that world changes for them. When we talk about are we going to transform top level groups or are we going to put something new on top of it, that's because these things exist today. Like, how are we going to present this to the users when they need to make the change? So a slight difference of things there, but I think
ultimately,
like the ultimate object is unchanged by that debate.
yes, I agree. And I think one thing that is the most important thing from a pod's perspective is, and this is still to be validated, right? If we can do this and get away with it, right? That's you pointed that out.
Yeah.
We want to essentially have a relatively strict wall surrounding all the things that belong to either a workspace or an organization and put it on a single pod and not allow a lot of interactions between those things, sacrificing potentially some social functions. How that works, in detail, and the user experience of that is still very much up for debate. We don't know, right, specifically, but that's the thing that we really need to figure out.
And I think from a user experience perspective, it's users don't care.
Yes,
they
that's kind
don't
of
care
my take as well.
what organization they're in, what they're doing, both whether it's within your organization, like within your own company, we'll say. Let's not use the word organization. Within your own company, there are times when, if we take top level groups as what would be a workspace there, we know like within companies, users are crossing over those workspaces as well, but also outside, community contributions and things like that.
Yeah.
There's a number of reasons why, from a user perspective, when I log into GitLab, I need to see things in multiple workspaces potentially.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe just to be clear. I think this is why I think having, like, right now, right, we have this example at GitLab. We have GitLab-org and GitLab-com, right? And those two things in the pod world need to live on a single pod for exactly those reasons, right? I want users to be able to cross between those things, and group them. But that is something that sits sort of a little bit above for me. And ultimately for new signups, right, I think this is a valid question. It's like, if we had these capabilities that we're discussing now, would we just have created a gitlab.com/gitlab and be done with it? Right? That's, I don't know. That's a migration question of how we would sign up new users, right? If it would become part of the path. There's a lot of interesting questions surrounding that. But ultimately, and I mean, this is a question for you and something that I'm trying to like figure out. Because we also have naming difficulties here, right? I think the remote development environment group, I don't quite know what the correct name is. They're thinking about using the term workspace as well. You're using it. I'm not using it. I'm using organization. So I'm trying to sort of figure out if we can make a simple proposal sort of for now that we can change if we gather more data that says this is not right. That would look like this. We put an organization at the top that would replace the term workspace that you are using for what you're doing. That would be an organization. Below that are groups. They've lost all of the special top level pieces. They're now at the organizational level. They have subgroups and projects, and I know that you have, you're reconciling some of those things as well. I think that's completely untouched by that. And then the remote development environment can use the term workspace for what they're doing, because I think that's kind of a standard that is emerging in their field with code spaces and workspaces. I think then we have one term, the organization, which I think would reflect what you're trying to do. right? And would essentially be what you're trying to accomplish. The remote folks get the workspace, and we only have one additional entity, because I completely agree. I don't want to have two new things, right? That's going to be very confusing.
Yeah, the only the timing of that would be the only question I had there. Is we have research scheduled to determine the naming. Um, I would want to wait until that research is completed and then make the decision. Changing the name at this point from
Yeah.
Workspace to organizations is just going to cause a nightmare of bookkeeping and updating, and it's going to imply that we are intentionally making that change. Whereas if we wait until after the research, we can make an intentional change.
Yeah, I would be in favor of waiting as well until we have the research done, because there's also other aspects to it, right? That it's already documented like this workspace externally, internally in the documentation, as well as about GitLab.com. So we've already familiarized customers that we're speaking with in interviews, right, with this term as this thing that will become the new higher level organizational helper tool. Plus, it would have impact on the team, what it's named, the categories. So it's not a small change to rename.
No, it's not a small change, but I think right now we also live in a world where we have different terms that competing with each other, and I have a slight bias for action. You know, it's like we can change it, and we can always revert it until we wait, and you know, maybe it's going to take us 6 months to make that decision, but that's something that we can certainly discuss. So like I have a preference for moving forward, but what's more important to me is that we are aligned sort of below that, right?
Yeah.
Sorry? Philosophically, right? Because what I don't think, and this is important, I don't think you need to wait on anything that Pods is doing. And if we're philosophically aligned and we know that we're talking about the same thing, then that's, I think, much more important. But we need to find a language that we can use together, you know, that accomplishes that. And I think that's probably the first priority, and the second priority is the naming, which is notoriously hard.
Yeah. For me, I was just making sure that, you know, the semantics in there of we will introduce organizations was somewhat vague to me in the sense of, you know, trying to nail down the implications of that. If that means that we are going to build one thing and it is going to be the workspace / organization / container of thingy things, the way Christina described it, like, then I don't think we have any issues here today. If it was something different than that, then we would need to work through the experience implications of that. But it sounds like that is not the case. So
I don't think so. And I think, I mean, it's all very abstract, right? I think the most important thing that I think needs to be understood is that we want to group things that are currently top level namespaces, right? And that's the thing that we need to group, right? So if we ended up, let's say, turning GitLab-org into a workspace, and GitLab-com into a second workspace for GitLab, and we would have no way of grouping those to GitLab, the entity, you know, that I think would be a problem for us, right? I think that's the crux of the matter, which is why I'm saying like it needs to be above what is currently there, right? And in the future, you know, maybe, you know, the entity at that level becomes part of the path. I don't know, but that's the important thing for me, because we need this grouping.
But we need to be careful when we talk about that, though, because if we say it's on top of top level groups now, that implies that an organization that currently on .com has chosen to have 5 top level groups, you are now forcing that entity to combine itself.
Yeah.
Which is not what we necessarily are going to do.
Well,
it could very well be that organization, like that, let's say that company has 5 top level groups now. It could very well be that company has 5 workspaces. and not one workspace that has 5 top-level items in it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think people may choose to do this, but I think that should be the exception. And I think it may be for various organizational reasons, right? I think if the bidding, I think that's something that is part of the migration story, right? Is this something where people really want these things separate from each other? Which then I think ultimately would mean that they are not interacting as much, then okay. But my assumption is that, for example, for GitLab's case, we would combine them into a single entity.
Right.
Because, right? And that's maybe something where we have to figure out how to do this. But right now, for example, I think my assumption is that 95 or more % of our paying customers only have a single top level namespace because that's where they get billed. And I think it is pretty rare that they have more.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's
Yeah.
I think the average is 7.
I've been trying so I'm trying to work with the product analytics team with Matthew to get data on this because I don't know. So I think we should get that out there, at least for .com. We can
I think that is fair, but I think that is, if I spoke to fulfillment, they suggest that I have not seen the data. We should certainly double check. But I think the assumption is that, if you have several top level namespaces, you need to have, you will get billed differently at different levels as well, right? You will have one that is in ultimate and one that is in premium, for example. I'm pretty sure they have many. Yeah.
And that's why it's key. The messaging on this does get very, very razor thin, but very, it matters a lot in the sense that if we imply that we are going to combine those top level groups and an organization has chosen separate billing for those for a reason, and we imply that we're going to force them to not do that anymore, that could be
that may
frustrating.
imply they have to pay different licensing costs all of a sudden. No, I understand that. Okay, I don't have all the answers either, right? We're at the beginning of that journey. Okay, but
I'd like to think that Workspace is in the middle. It's not. We're probably not in the middle, but we are.
Right, in terms of like the. I was speaking about myself, not you.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think the naming discussion is something that we still should resolve, or at least come to a decision what we do. I think if moving away from from the term workspace is too onerous at the moment, then maybe it's easier for us to rename ourselves to Workspace, and that'll be it, or Workspace/organization. I don't know. That's something to be figured out. But my impression is still, philosophically, we're pretty close to each other. There may be that, it's a little bit hard to know we're building POCs at which you can maybe also see how that would actually look, because that's the impact that is, I think, difficult to visualize without actually seeing it potentially.
Yeah, I think at the entity organizational, what this thing is going to be, I think we're pretty aligned philosophically. I think where our I don't know how to say that word in that tense, but where our philosophies, there we go, where our philosophies maybe are slightly different I have gotten the sense that the feeling is I need to share more. I need to be able to interact with more entities, more organizations, more things. And so building walls, containerizing things feels like the opposite of that. Now, that may not end up to be true. I think it's those paths and those connections and the details of that matters. But philosophically, those feel like two different directions.
Yes,
but
I think that is fair. And I think there are maybe 2 points to this. I only have some very preliminary analysis that I did last year. I'll send this to you, that looked at sort of usage, like users and how many different top level namespaces they touched. And 90% of paid users touch one, 85% or something like that. So I think there is some preliminary data, but we've never really gotten to the meat of that. And measuring this is very hard, right? Which I think would be a sort of a quantitative way of looking at our system at the moment and actually getting some hard evidence, which I want to do in the pods team as well, because I think that would be quite informative also for you, you know, to sort of see, you know, do users actually move, you know, between different top level groups at the moment? You know, do they interact with more than one? And why is that? I think that's a big question that I think I still have. And I think then from a sort of product strategy perspective, the question is really a lot of these, at least in my mind, if you are a company and you come to GitLab.com for a paid, you know, for, you know, like moving your DevOps work here, are you participating in social functions that are going to sort of mean that you're going to contribute to open source projects or not? How important is this? I think that's a big part of the openness. And I think ultimately what we're not proposing is you have one user account and you can be only part of one single organization or workspace either. You could become a member of many of them, but you may need to context switch between them a little bit more than before, because, and I think that may be something where I saw some design proposals where it became more obvious to users, you know, maybe with a dropdown or something where they are, or more opaque. And I think that needs to take into account what is actually possible in terms of interactions. Right? If it's seamless and you can go anywhere and it doesn't matter, then you may not need to highlight it. If it is clear that you can do certain things within a workspace or organization, but you can't go across, right, then that becomes much more important, I think, for a user to understand naturally, right, and be aware of. I think that's something to factor in. But we don't need to solve these problems today.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I think let's make sure we align on a proposal and what to do next in the next week or so, because I think that's just going to be helpful for everyone to know what we're talking about. And yeah, but I think I hope I answered most of the questions. Like, I don't want two entities. I think they're 90% the same, but I think the one is about the other, and I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Gotcha.
Just as a side note, that the research about the naming is actually being set up at the moment, so I don't think it's going to take months. I think Ben had already composed the survey and was sending it out like either this week or next week.
Okay.
Because Eric has some urgency to figure out his naming by the end of the year, basically. So I don't think it would take too long to come to a conclusion there. But I would be in favor of leaving it as Workspace for now, rather than changing it and then potentially changing it back. And leaving it like this for now and then changing it if we have a conclusion, so that at least we just do one change.
Yeah, I understand that. I think I'm a bit partial to this, but I think we'll figure it out either way. And it's good to hear that this is on the way. I know that there is some urgency on Eric's side as well. So maybe, you know, I was hoping we could potentially shortcut a lot of this and align on something and have a sort of a thing that resolves most of those conflicts pretty much immediately, and then we can validate that solution later on. But I see that there's probably some operational overhead as well.
As most things in Workspace, right? Would that it were so simple, right?
Nothing is simple.
A lot of these things are first look, you're like, oh, this will be no problem, and then very quickly things.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're building a new architecture for GitLab, so most of the things we're touching are, you know, not easy to understand, at least for me.
Very thick and lots of implications.
Sorry?
It's a very thick subject that has lots of implications to lots of different scenarios.
Yeah, but that's, I think, why it's important to have a chat, right? Because
I
I think this is a little bit of something that I have to resolve as well. It's like, I don't want to do things that are going to make everyone's life a lot harder.
Yeah.
But if we don't talk to each other, it's likely that that will happen, because it is, it's just difficult to do exactly the same thing without coordination. And we are proposing a pretty fundamental change. So at the moment, my desire is to figure out, if what we are doing is going to really be negatively impacting others like you or fulfillment, or if it is sort of net neutral or makes it maybe slightly harder, but that's actually acceptable. And at least my stance at the moment is that I think it's mostly compatible. It may make some things harder, but we're not completely going in opposite directions and have a direct conflict. That's how I would say it.
Yep, great. And thank you for taking time to do this. Should we, I feel like we need to summarize this in a comment on that issue so that thread's not hanging out there.
Yeah, sure. Do
So
you want to write that?
20-minute conversation that
Yes.
now has to be put into a couple of lines of text that hopefully don't introduce more confusion. But
no, we recorded this. My suggestion is maybe one of you leave a comment on it, because I think I've sort of stated mine above, and then we link to this video, and we'll probably still have a couple of misunderstandings in there, which is fine, right? And then, but we'll move it forward. I think it's important, but it's not super urgent, right? As in, it's more important to get it right, I think, than to resolve it all today. But I would like to be able to resolve it in the next week or so.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool, thank you. All right, bye-bye.